All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our October webinar. My name is Eleanor Rangers. I'm the president of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Cold War Historical Society. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving Cold War history from the Southeastern Pennsylvania area. We're celebrating our 13th year of doing this labor of love. And of course, this is our History in Our Backyard webinar series. And I'd also like to thank the Fuge. While we're not doing our event at the Fuge this evening, they have been a consistent supporter of our group, and we do very much appreciate that. Also wanted to mention for folks, if you aren't aware, there is a new brewery and pub at the Fuge if you're local to the Warminster area, and definitely check it out. They have a space theme going on there, and they have their own beer that they brew, and there's been a lot of live entertainment and so forth there, so it's becoming an increasingly popular spot for people to stop by and have a brew and maybe some pizza. Also, I just want to mention, as a nonprofit organization, we operate on a very modest budget, I would say shoestring budget. And certainly, if you so choose, we always welcome donations to our organization so that we can continue to offer programming like this, as well as other activities. Also want to mention, we are making progress on our display room dedicated to Naval Air Development Center history. Fingers crossed, I'm hoping to have sort of the initial layout completed fairly soon. I probably will schedule a formal little dedication ceremony for it as well. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Also, for those of you who are unable to make our monthly programs, we do record these and we do archive them on our YouTube channel, which is under the same name of our organization. So I would encourage you to check that out. I do try to add content to that site pretty regularly as well. So I just wanted to encourage you to check that out. We also have a Facebook page. So if you are on that social media platform, definitely check us out there. I do try to post information about our ongoing programs, as well as some other programs and other Cold War related information. So definitely worth checking that out as well. And kindly, if you could mute your cameras and mute your microphones and cameras, except for Chuck. It just helps with preserving bandwidth for the presentation, so appreciate that. But certainly, we'll have opportunity for Q&A at the end of the presentation this evening. So we have, Chuck, who we'll introduce in a moment, is doing our October webinar. We may be doing something for Veterans Day. I'm still trying to get that together. That may be actually where we may have the formal dedication of our display room for NADC. But more information will be forthcoming on that very quickly. And then we're going to conclude our year with David Stumpf returning. He started the year and he ended the year. He will be talking about Minuteman missile vulnerability. So looking forward to that. And we are in the process of rounding out our 2024 live and webinar lecture series. So more to come on that fairly soon as well. I also am hopefully going to plan another movie night at the Fuge. We're looking to have a viewing of the somewhat campy X-15 movie, actually filmed in space. So look for a date for that fairly soon. I'm toying with probably doing that sometime over the winter. And we will have a virtual discussant. Some of you may have been with us in 2019 when Michelle Evans joined us, who is an X-15 historian, and she will be available for Q&A and commentary about the movie following its viewing. So more details to come on that as well. And as I mentioned, I probably will have some sort of commemorative event for Veterans Day coming up. I'm leaning towards having this when we would also dedicate our NADC display room So more details on that forthcoming fairly quickly. If I do schedule it, it would be on November 9th, and it would be a live event at the Fusion Warminster. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker this evening, Chuck Phillips. So Chuck was born in 1928 in Chester, Pennsylvania, and after graduating high school in 1946, he enlisted with the Army Air Force, and following basic training, he was assigned to Army Counterintelligence. He attended the Pennsylvania Military College, which is now Widener University, on the GI Bill, and he received a bachelor's in electrical engineering in 1953. And he served in the Army Military Intelligence Reserve for 3¼ years while in college. Chuck worked for the Department of Defense at the Naval Air Development Center in Warminster, PA from 1953 to 1983, which of course was one of the DoD's most important research and development facilities at the time. He was project engineer on autopilot control systems for drone aircraft for 9 years, and was program manager of all of the Navy's ASW telemetry systems for 21 years, installing systems on 17 aircraft carriers and at 5 NATO bases, and half of the systems on the LAMPS helicopters. He also worked on a NASA project and was a part-time equipment specialist for the CIA for 16 years. So he has had quite a colorful career. He's gotten to see a lot of the world and took many Navy cruises and flew in many Navy aircraft, both from land and on and off aircraft carriers. And following his retirement from NADC, he worked for United Technologies for 5½ years as program manager for Atlas and Titan missile telemetry systems, and was responsible for the telemetry data system during 8 missile launches from Vandenburg Air Force Base in California. Both Chuck's work at NADC and for United Technologies were high stress but rewarding parts of his life. So without further ado, I am going to turn things over to Chuck, who is going, who is going to talk about aircraft carrier ASW capabilities this evening. So Chuck, turn it over to you, and just let me know when I need to advance slides.
Okay, thank you, Eleanor. A very long time ago, back in the 1950s and early 60s, the only airborne CASW systems were passive sonobuoys named Jezebel and active sonobuoys named Julie. And they were dropped from either Grumman S2F trackers off the carriers, or P2V Neptunes or P3 Orions. And their signals could be processed on board the aircraft and or recorded. The S2 was very small. It had only room for a 4-buoy processor, and the operator had to manually select between the buoys in an 8-buoy system, which was common in those days, either in straight line or 4 in a line and staggered. And incidentally, coming off of a very bad cold, so you'll see me popping cough drops every once in a while. I'm sorry about that. Okay, I transferred to the ASW lab in the sonar division and the receiver branch at NADC in August of 1962. And in January 1963, the branch head transferred, and I became the new one, as I was the only engineer in the receiver branch. I was told to get up to speed on ASW, so I went on a 2-week aircraft carrier cruise for ship operation and familiarization from Bermuda to Halifax on the Intrepid, which was performing ASW work with a submarine. And at the end of that, they were dropping all kinds of sonar buoys and little explosive charges to try to locate the Thresher, which was sunk just shortly before then on the way to Halifax. Okay, I went to, in addition to that, I went to the ASW Tactical Officer School for introduction into tactics and operations. And I made many trips to the Pentagon and Navy offices in Washington and shipyards in Boston, Bremerton, Jacksonville, Long Beach, Norfolk, Philadelphia, and San Diego. And I had to find out about Jezebel and Julie. I think the Jezebel name was derived from the biblical Kings 1, Queen of Israel. She was a betrayer, which related to betraying the presence of a submarine, and was used to passive sonobuoys that only listens for sub-sounds, which were transmitted to the aircraft for analysis.
Chuck, do you want me to
System
advance?
of sonobuoys.
Chuck, I'm
utilizing-
sorry. Can I interrupt real quick? Let me know when I should advance the slides.
Oh, okay. Let me do one little thing if I can up here. Because I have pictures of the slides, but it's all covered up now and full screen. But at any rate, and I can't use my iPad for that. Eleanor, is there some way that you can take my full screen and make it like a half a screen?
I'm not sure I'm able to do that because I'm in display mode right now. Because I just wondered, since you were starting to talk about Jezebel, the next slide is Jezebel. So that's why I wondered if we needed to advance slides.
Yes, I know. I have those photographs up on my screen, but then your screen covered them.
You may want to try reducing the Zoom screen or hit the escape key. That may help you to reduce the size of the Zoom so you can see the.
Oh, that. Uh-oh, I just clicked on leaving the meeting. I didn't mean to do
Oh,
that.
don't leave the meeting.
Come on. See, I'm viewing your screen, it says here.
Right.
And I was just wondering if you could hook a corner or something and make it smaller.
I don't think I can in the if I'm in viewing mode.
And screen record.
Well, if you know what the topic is, I can probably guess and advance the slides.
Yeah. And I don't have photographs, and I can't get them on my iPad, so I'm stuck. So, at any rate,
Well, why don't we go ahead and just
I actually haven't gotten into where I was talking about the 7 photographs. The first one was looking up the mast.
Right.
So,
but I think we were talking about Jezebel. So
yeah.
You can see on the screen, I did pull up Julie and Jezebel to talk about what those are for our audience. So maybe we could just continue there.
At any rate, when I run into the words that I'm looking for there, I will be able to get you to put the pictures up. At any rate, the sonar system for Julie was to put sonobuoys in the water and drop small explosive charges, and of course the charge would be heard by the hydrophone, and the echo off the submarine would also bounce back, and that information could be relayed to the S2F or the P2 or P3, and that information was sent, and they could tell by the timing where the submarine is located. They would need several of them to intersect to pick out the exact spot. But as soon as you dropped one of those charges, of course, the submarine now would know that you're looking for them and take whatever evasive maneuvers they might want to do. Okay, while the members of an ASW squadron were visiting NADC, they were taken to a strip joint. And the strip joint was called the Wedge in Philadelphia. And this is Julie Gibson, the picture, and it shows that the VS 880 were the guys visiting, and someone at that meeting mentioned that she is enough to make a passive boy active. And that's how Julie got its name. She was born that night when they decided that the echoing off the submarine would be called the Julie system. And that's Julie's picture. So at any rate, and I tried to find out if she's still living, and I never could find out. I did find a Julie Gibson who was a movie star who lived to be 106, but I don't correlate between her and this Julie Gibson. So I don't know what the story was on that. Okay, there were 5 carriers of our carriers sunk during the Second World War, and we had a total of 32 carriers when the war ended, and there were another 20 brought into service by the time I retired in 1983. That doesn't mean we had 52 carriers, however, because the older ones were being mothballed and retired as the new ones came on board. And while I was checking on these ASW systems, I heard that the Randolph number 15 was going to be elected to be one of the ones. So I checked it out and found out that it had all the attributes that would be required for a system. Now, to deviate a little bit, there was a company in Philadelphia named Raymond Rosen, and I think it was bought by Hamilton Standard of the United Technologies and renamed Teledynamics. They moved from Philadelphia into Fort Washington, Pennsylvania, and they were working on what could be relayed data from an aircraft to some other location. And so consequently, the system was called Multi-Channel Jezebel Relay, or the acronym MCJR, which everybody called Monkey Jr., because MCJR was kind of a quasi classified acronym at those days. And of course, they only worked with passive sonobuoy systems. Now, in order to defeat a submarine, there were 4 stages that you had to go through, and they were called detection, classification, localization, and kill. And a detection, of course, is just trying to eliminate all the biologic sounds in the ocean, like whales or shrimp or surface ships, or even just raining on the water. The classification involves what is it? Identify it as a ship or a submarine. Is it ours or theirs, or what type is it? Localization is just that. Where is it? And there are ways to that we would use utilizing passive buoys and the active Julie buoys to locate the submarine. And of course, kill was just a matter of the weapon load you had with you and how you were utilizing them. So at any rate, at 1964, when they mentioned the Randolph to me, I went to visit it in Norfolk and on the ship, and I saw the process they were making for the converting the spaces to be where the MCJR system would be installed. And I mentioned to them where the process, where will the processors be, where would their sub-assembly units be? And they said, oh, they're going to be right here next to each other. And I suggested they look for another location for them because the old equipment was very noisy, and it also generated a tremendous amount of heat. So they opted on a separate location for the sub-assemblies. And I was designated as a program manager for all the airborne and shipboard MCJR systems. Okay, let me see, I covered that. Okay, when the sonobuoys were dropped from aircraft, if you didn't have some way of retarding their speed, they would just explode when they hit the water. So they had either a parachute or a rotating device similar to a free-falling seed from a maple tree. And that would control the speed so they wouldn't break up. And when they hit the water with sufficient force, it released the chute or the rotary device and also released the antenna from the top of the sonobuoy. At the same time, a hydrophone was dropped from the bottom of it on a short wire, and the hydrophone was like a microphone underwater, and they would listen in the shallow surface water, and if they didn't hear anything, they could release the hydrophone and unravel more cable to it so that it would get below the thermocline and have more even space to listen for the sonobuoy. However, they could not bring it back up again. That was just a one-shot deal. And the sonobuoy had a small plug in it that was salt, and the salt would begin to dissolve. And when it dissolved to a certain degree, then water would start to flow in and sink the sonobuoy. And that took about 2 hours. So they had 2 hours of operation before that would disappear, and then they could replace it with other channels. And they on board the aircraft, there was a receiver, and its designation was ARR 52. It was a 4-channel receiver, and the 4 channels were identical, other than they could be tuned to whatever frequencies were being transferred by the sonobuoys. So the MCJR system would require another antenna and another transmitter on board the S2 so that it could be relayed back to the aircraft carrier. Now, the carriers never had any built-in passive systems because going through the water, the only sonar they had would have been too noisy. So anyway, on board the ship, when they had installed the MCJR components, they used an AQA5, which was fairly new coming out at that time. And they could scan all 8 signals coming from each S2 in an interlace mode. In other words, it would look at 4 of them, and then the next 4, then the first 4 and the second 4. And if any kind of an indication that there was something in the water, then they could narrow down which sonobuoys were picking it up and get a good trace on 4 of them. And that was the system that was being utilized.
Chuck, would you like me to advance to one of those images? Because right now I'm showing the Randolph.
Not quite, because let me go back to the Randolph. When I got off the Randolph, after its cruise to from Norfolk to Bermuda, my foot hit the pier, and as soon as it did, my head went into total vertigo. I was so used, I guess, to the motion of the ship. I almost fell on my face. I sat on my suitcase, and 2 sailors come along that were in CIC, and I had them help me to get my suitcase into a taxi cab after we had to convince the guy I wasn't drunk. And I said to him, do you know a place where I could rent a room in a house, because I don't want to go to a hotel and be just alone in a hotel room. So they took me to this lovely house, lovely lady ran it. And after they got me up all the steps to get up to her porch, which was quite a bit above the ground level, and they got me up into a bedroom, and I paid the cab, and he left. And the lady was still pretty skeptical. And I said, look, I'm going to go to sleep. I'm not sleepy, but I know that I have a capability of going to sleep and solving a lot of my problems. Well, I took a nap and woke up and tried to stand up and immediately walked into a wall. So I got back into bed, and for 3 days I stayed in that lady's room. She brought my meals to me. The first day and a half, she fed me because I couldn't hold a spoon or a fork. And at any rate, I found out, I finally called the Navy base, and they told me that don't get back on the ship. It's leaving this afternoon anyway. And so they said, can you get here? So I went over, and the sailor very nicely said, I can get you an airline ticket tomorrow to go from here to Philadelphia. He said, I can offer you $500 in cash if you need any more money than that. And I said, no, that would be enough. So what I did that afternoon, I took a cab over to where I knew the ship was going to leave. Okay, you can change the picture, Eleanor, to the second one. And there's the Randolph leaving Bermuda with me on the beach. I wasn't about to get on that ship again. And I did finally get home the following day, and everything was all right. So, okay, so now we can go back to the end of that. And the next ship that they were talking about was going to be from MCJR, they had another additional thing, and that was that's a picture of the Saratoga, and there's the antenna about 12 feet below the top of the mast, and that's the antenna that reached got the signals from the 4 aircraft. And you can go to the next one, Eleanor. And that's after I climbed up there, I had to investigate it, installations and everything. And I had a man aloft jet, and all the ships around the area had to turn off their radars and everything, so I wouldn't be cooked from the inside out. And I'd go up and work on that. And when I came down, the CIC officer said, "What are you doing up there?" And I said, "I was meditating." And he said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, it was just me and God and lightning rod." So anyway, everything looked okay. And it came back down again. And you can show the next picture now. There had to be a preamplifier built in at the top of the mast because the signals coming in were so weak from these S2s that go out for 100 miles and relay sonobuoy information back. And so we put a preamplifier in there. And at the bottom right-hand side, you can see a good-sized coax cable that was 3 inches in diameter with a 1-inch diameter solid copper pipe all the way down, which was the antenna element for its raceway. And the other 2 connectors underneath of the preamp were the antenna line coming in, and one was a power line coming from some power spot on the up on top of the mast. Okay, so that being the case, when I got into the ASCAC end of it, like I said, was Anti-Submarine Classification Analysis Center, on the the next ship I have pictures of was the Nimitz, number 68. And you can show the next one there. There's a picture of the ANSKR-6, which has the power supply in the bottom, along with the fan and the on-off switch. In the middle of it, there are 4 identical receivers. One would be tuned to each of the 4 S2s that were out doing their thing. The next one up from that was the rack of a control panel where you could do a lot of controlling, which I'll get into in a minute. And at the top of it, there are 4 banks, identical, and each of those discriminators would be tuned to the channels of the 8 sonobuoys that were information was being relayed back. So that was one complete unit of the shipboard ASCAC and modified MCJR. Okay, you can put the next one on, Eleanor. Okay, this is a step back. You can see the SKR-6 is right next, is just about in the middle, a little to the left. And there are the 4 AQA-5s that would do the processing on board the ship. And what they would be doing is looking at the outputs of the 4 aircraft, and in what they called interlace mode, they could put 8 sonobuoys into that thing. And each time the cursor would go across, it would take one 4 group, the next group of 4, next group of 4, next group of 4, back and forth. And if any kind of information started to emanate, then you would be able to zero out the ones that weren't providing you information, and they would be a zero in on the 4 that were. So you can put the next one up. And there's what the paper looks like coming out of an AQA-5. This is totally unclassified. It may have been classified at the time they were in full swing, but at any rate, that's what the paper looked like. And you can see there's 4 channels there: a dark one, medium, a little darker, and a lot lighter. And this paper rolling up on the end here, it would just continue to go and go and go. And from the information that they derived from these 4 channels would not only identify a submarine, they could tell what type it was, whose it was, and information like how many revs the propellers were making, therefore how much speed they were generating, and so forth. So I think that was the is that the last one of those, Eleanor? Oh no, the last element of the SKR-6 was a test antenna that they put alongside of the flight deck, hanging off the edge, where it was in nobody's way, and it pointed to the receiving antenna up the mast. And from that control panel on the SKR-6, they could generate signals that would be transmitted to the receiver as receiving antenna, and then the preamplifier down into the rack of receivers and discriminators, and you could generate signals and identify where a problem might be if something's not working correctly. So it had a complete built-in test system that didn't interfere with anybody. And that's pretty much the whole system that we were building, we were buying from Teledynamics eventually when we really got into the swing of it. Okay, I think that's the last of those photographs. Oh no, the last one, I took a picture at one time. I was up there, I took my camera and I took a picture of the flight deck. The top of the mast was usually about 200 feet from the flight deck. And the flight deck was maybe 100 feet off the water. So when I was in Norfolk and there was a good breeze coming up the Chesapeake Bay, I could be leaning over 200 feet over the flight deck, and the other direction I'd be leaning 300 feet over the Chesapeake Bay. And it seemed like a pretty good idea to hold on tight when that was happening. Okay, so at any rate, I went through that. Okay. All right, I finished that down to there. Okay, now after I did all of my work at the 21 years in ASW, and I retired with my 3 years in the service. I was 33 years. I was 55, and I went to work for Teledynamics, which was a natural place. I knew the company in and out just about after buying all the systems to put on these ships. Okay, put the next one on, Eleanor. The next, okay. When I got off the ship in Bergen, Norway, I wanted to go with them because I wanted to get more experience. And the Pentagon had sent a message with with what they were going to do with the ship when they left Bergen, and what they had discussed prior to leaving. And what it said was, when you begin your exercises, you are to have no civilians on board the Essex. That includes Mr. Phillips. And he told me that, and I said, how did they know that I was going to want to do that? Why did they name me? He said, because I think they know you. And the guy said to me, what are your clearances? And I said, well, I was cleared secret and top secret. And on one of my Navy projects, I was cleared crypto. He said, then I'm going to tell you, he said, but you keep your mouth shut for 50 years if you can. He said, what we're going to do, it was in June, and the ice was beginning to melt up in the Arctic Circle. And the Soviets normally came out and exercised all the new things that they were building, the new submarines, the new techniques, the new equipment, and so forth. And what we're going to do is trying to spy on them by using your relay, and hopefully we don't start World War III. And I said, I can keep my mouth shut for 50 years. So now I'm 95 years old, and I guess, I don't know if it's 50 years or not, but it's pretty damn close. So at any rate, I went to work for Teledynamics. And when I went in the first day, I said to the personnel manager, I was told both by the Navy Department in Washington and the people in the Pentagon that I worked with, that if I go to work for them, I cannot work on any of their ASW hardware that they're building or designing. And I said, why is that? He said, because you bought equipment from them for so long, we don't want anybody saying you're harboring this guy who set up this big position for him. And I said to him, so it's okay with me if you got something else for me to do. And he said, that's perfect. We need a program manager for our Atlas and Titan missile telemetry systems. So I went from underwater telemetry systems to outer space telemetry systems. I never had a job on the ground. So at any rate, I was working for them, and eventually they called, the Pentagon called NADC and said they wanted to speak to me. And they said he retired. And I said, well, who replaced him? And they said, nobody. You were finished with the aircraft carriers. They said, who said we were finished with the aircraft carriers? He never said that, I'm sure. And I never did. So then they said, how can I get in touch with him? And he said, he's at TD, Teledynamics. So they called and got me on the phone and told me that they had an aircraft carrier that they wanted a system put on. And I'm the only one that they can think of that can do it. So I said, you talk to the people here and I'll do whatever's necessary. You know, if they say it's okay, I'll be happy to do it. Well, they made a deal that as long as I was going to be away from my desk, that they were going to charge the teledynamics $800 an hour for my time that I would be normally using for the Air Force contracts that I had for putting up these missiles. So of course, I didn't get any of that. I was salaried. Everybody knows how that goes, right? So at any rate, they said that the Midway aircraft carrier was in Yokosuka, Japan, in dry dock, having all kinds of new things done to it. And they said, would you go? And I said, yeah, I'll go. So that's okay. So at any rate, I had senior moment. Well, at any rate, the photograph shows that the Essex could not be pulled into the pier because it didn't have enough of a draft. So they parked it out in the fjord and used boats to haul everybody back and forth on and off of the ship. And they had a thing there they called a funicular, I believe. It was one trolley car and one track that went up to the top of the mountain. And so I expected to go. I said, I'll do it. I'm not going to be going on a ship anymore. So up I go. And as I'm going up, here's another car coming down. So there were two cars on the end of the same cable. And when they got to the middle, for a distance of about maybe 100 feet, maybe 200 feet, there was a dual track. And as they were coming down like this, and they got to just about touching, they did this, went around like this, and went around like that. And they were so close together, people leaned out the windows and shook hands with each other between the two cars. So that was pretty neat, I thought. So at any rate, yes, so I enjoyed that, and I got home, and there were no flights from Bergen, Norway at all. It's too mountainous, but they send you either by bus or some other means to get to the airport. And of course, from there, they did not have any planes that went directly to JFK or to Philadelphia. So when I went in to get my ticket, the gal said, you have a choice. You can't go straight home. There are no nonstop flights. So you have a choice. And don't go, but you're going to have to either spend a night or 2 nights in either Paris or London. And I put my hand over my mouth so I didn't go, So at any rate, I stayed a night in London on the way home, and it just happened to be the Queen's official birthday. And they had the trooping of the colors and all the la-di-da. And when I went over there, a guy said to me, you're new here. I said, yeah. I said, I'm an American and I'm on my way home. He said, if you want to see the Queen and you want to see the royal family, you stand on the roots of this tree. This monstrous big tree. It had roots outside. And he said, you stand there and don't let anybody get in back of you. So I stood there for an hour, and pretty soon the festivities all started. And here comes the Queen of England riding side saddle on a horse all by herself. And I was no more than 35 feet from her when she in this driveway. And she went in there, and then came the royal carriage, and there was her husband, there was her mother, there was Charles and Anne, and all of the whole rest of the family. And the solid, I'm sure it was solid gold. I doubt if it was gold leaf. But at any rate, and they went on this thing, and then they had all the ceremonies and everything, and the Queen went and trooped all the riding side saddle, inspected all of the troops. There were the Scots in their Highland kilts, and the Irish and the Welsh, and South American had a big group there of black soldiers from there, and so that was all neat. The only other thing that it was pretty neat was that when I was walking over to look at the Trafalgar Square, where Lord Nelson is at the top, and I had just come from seeing the big monstrous statue of Queen Victoria, and I got over to Nelson's thing, and there's an old gentleman there in a bowler hat holding an umbrella. Wasn't raining, but holding an umbrella in a tweed suit. And I said, man, you can't get any more British than that. And he said, turned around to me and he said, you're a Yank. And I said, yes. And at the base of this Lord Nelson thing, there are 4 gigantic bronze lions in the 4 corners. And he said, you don't know the story of the lions then, do you? And I said, no, I'm afraid I don't. He said, every time a virgin walks by, they roar. And then he held his stomach and he laughed and laughed to that. And at any rate, that's my London story.
Yeah.
So at any rate, we started then, since and the way we got the equipment onto the Essex was the old system, still with tubes in it, was put on the Randolph. It came into Norfolk in March of 1967, and I was there with a big Ford van that I rented, and we put that equipment on that Ford van, and I drove it right directly to Teledynamics, and I got that pulled out. Now, the reason that the effort for the Essex, the guys on the Pentagon told me that they wanted to put a similar system on the Essex. And I said, okay, because usually it would take a year to build a whole new system. And they said, that's why you got the Randolph stuff. He said, we want you to make an effort to get rid of all the tube stuff that's in that big rack and use that rack to hold what Teledynamics has been experimenting with, solid state stuff, and put it in that rack and put it on the Essex. And I said, well, that sounds like a logical way to do it. He said, but. I said, there's always a but. He said, no, there's 2 buts. He said, the Essex is leaving in June. This was in March, the end of March, they're telling me this. And I said, that's impossible. He said, well, see what you can do. I said, what's the other but? He said, we don't have any money. There's no money in the budget. And I said, yeah, that's gonna make it kind of hard. So he said, if you can do whatever you can do to meet even part of the requirement, is that we'll be very grateful. So I went to Teledynamics, and I went into their contracts officer, and I said, and he was a perfect gentleman. He was one of the nicest persons I've ever met. And he said to me, you look worried. I said, yes, and when I'm going to finish talking to you, you're going to look worried. And I told him the story. And he said, that's impossible. He said, it would take every one of our employees working full time, overtime, to even come close to that. And I said, I realized that. And I said, but there's no money. He said, Chuck, I can't put the company on full-time overtime. with nothing at all, not even a promise. And I thought about it, and I did something that was illegal. Well, I almost did something illegal. I said to him, I have 16 more years to go before I retire from NADC. If you can start right now putting your whole company into building the components for this thing, and you never get reimbursed, I will place an order with your company, if they were willing to do it, to buy things that you will not build, that I will accept and take to NADC and put in one of my lockers with the padlocks on them, and try to make up to the company what you lost during this. And he thought about it, and he said, you're right, you could go to jail. He said, but I'm going to be in the next cell. And he stood up and he put his hand out. And I shook hands with him. And I said, thank you. He said, we'll see what we can do. And they started, and I started. And as they would build the receivers, the discriminators, the power supplies they left in the rack, because they're just power supplies, and they build up all of the things that they needed. And when they'd get a load of them, I'd rent a truck, drive up to Providence, Rhode Island, to Quonset Point, and start plugging these things in. And I did that 3 times. The last time I went up there, we put the final components in the rack, and it was June. It was the end of May. And I said, I think everything is in that needs there. And I said to the CIC officer, can you make arrangements for a plane to take off and drop sonobuoys in front of what we called a TOO, target of opportunity, and drop some sonobuoys and see if we can get any signals? And he said, yeah. So that he did. And when they got up there, I was in the CIC, and the S2F pilot called in and he said, okay, I'm in the air. The antenna for the MCJR is down. Power is turned on, the transmitter. What do you want me to do? And I said, well, look for a target. He said, well, there's an old tramp steamer out there. I said, that sounds perfect to me. Go 5 miles in front of him, a little bit to the left, and drop a sonobuoy with a smoke signal, and go another 5 miles, and on the right of this guy's path, drop another one with smoke signals, and then go out 10 miles and start sending signals back. And everybody with their fingers crossed, look at those AQA5s. And I don't know what channel sonobuoys they put in the water, but I called them. I said, the first sonobuoy is 5 for 5 miles, and the second sonobuoy is 10 for 10 miles. And put the AQA5s in interlace and see if we can get any kind of a picture. And we're looking and looking and looking as this paper is moving very slowly. And all of a sudden, one of the ASW AQA5 operators said, I got a line. And I didn't say it to me. They're just a bunch of dots, random dots all over the paper. And he said, look here. And he showed me, he said, those random dots all over the place, but there's random dots forming a line. And we looked at all of them, and that was doing it on all of them. And we got back signals from that old tramp steamer through all of the channels. Everything was working. And that day, and when after I talked to the contracts officer, I went back and started an RFQ, a request for quotes, so that the base could start to buy things. And The day that we got the signal back through that system the first time was the day the contract was signed between Teledynamics and NADC to start to build the equipment. So I didn't go to jail. He didn't go to jail. And it was just so enlightening for that. Either the following day or 2 days later, we left and we got up into, it was in the middle of June by the time we got to Bergen, Norway. And we went to bed at night, like at 10 o'clock at night, and the sun was shining in the window. So I went down to the desk at the motel and I said, "Do you have a newspaper?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "You have anything called Scotch tape?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "How much is the newspaper?" He said, "It's yesterday's paper, take it." And I taped newspaper on all the windows in the room and finally got to sleep. But anyway, so that's my Essex story. Okay, so therefore, the next ship that we had working on was going to be the Yorktown. There's CVS 10, the Yorktown. It was out at sea off of Long Beach, California, and I had to fly out on a cod. And when I took off and went out there, I was standing there was the pilot, the co-pilot, the crew chief, and then me, and I was standing behind the crew chief, and I said, "Where's the carrier?" And the guy said, right in front of you. And I'm looking, I said, "I can't see it." He said, "Look for a postage stamp." And I said, "I don't see a postage stamp." And he said, "Wait a minute." And then he moved the ship just a little bit, and one little tiny speck didn't move. I said, "I think I see it." So anyway, he came, by the time he got up, caught up to it and so forth. You can show the next picture, Eleanor. So there's me taking a picture after I'm strapped in of the cod and getting ready to land on the Yorktown. And I'd done that many, many times. When you get shot off on the carrier, you think you're going to go all the way up to the front of the ship. And when you land, if you're not strapped in, you are going to end up in the back of the ship. And I've been on landings where people had eyeglasses torn off their faces and smashed into the bulkhead behind. One guy had his shoes were pulled off his feet, and they are violent. They're not kidding when they say it's a controlled crash. So at any rate, okay. So anyway, I got off the Yorktown. I got off the ship, met a couple people, had a sailor take me to CIC, and I walked in CIC and met the CIC officer and some of the other people there. And I said, "Where is the ASW equipment going to be put?" And they took me over to where it was going to be. And I walked in and I said, "Oh my God." He said, "What's the matter?" I said, "In just one quick glance, I see nothing that's correct." So he said, "Uh-oh." So there was a civilian from the shipyard in charge of the installations. And he called him over, and I told him that everything is wrong. And he said, "Well, we've got a full set of drawings from our drafting department." And he said, "And these were put in there exactly according to the drawings." And I said, "You're going to have to do one or two things. You're going to have to modify all the equipment, or you're going to have to change the drawings." So he got a crew in there, and I said, "Do you have an AQA5 on board?" And one of the sailors says, "Yeah." I said, "You know where they are?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Do you have a shock absorber, shock mount?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Go get me one." So he brought it over, and I put the shock mount on this flat surface of the top of the workbench. and I pushed down on it. And I said to the head guy, I said, the purpose of the shock mount is so that the things can shake, but your equipment won't. He said, yeah, that's right. I said, okay, so you got this, and you're going to put this down here, and you're going to bolt this onto the flat surface. And he said, yes. And I said, okay, I'm pushing down on it. You come over and show me how the shock mount works. And he comes over and he looks at it and he tries to move it. He said, I can't move it. I said, I know you can't move it. I said, did anybody investigate it? And they said, well, they saw the shock mount and everything, and it's going to get mounted. I said, did you ever look at it from the side? He said, I don't know. So we looked at it from the side. I said, do you see anything unusual? He said, they're not even. I said, no, they're not even. So I pushed the front of it down tight on the bench, and maybe in the back of it, I forget what it was, 5, 6 inches maybe up was the other shock mount. So I said, get me a piece of wood or something, a stack of books or something to put underneath of this one. And he got something and put it underneath of there. And I held on to that and I said, okay, now shake the shock mount. And he said, I can shake it. I said, what do you think about all the flat surfaces in here? They were going to take the AQE5s. Oh my. Well, I guess the long story is that he called everybody that he could to get him on the ship to look at what the thing is actually going to have to be done. And they got welders and cutters in there, and they had things pretty well straightened out. Instead of going by the drawings, they made it fit by installing it, and then they came in and made drawings of what it showed that it had to be. And I said, how do you think the operators are going to operate this? He said, they told me a piece of paper over there, so you're going to lean over and look at the top of it. And I said, no, and that's not going to work. So therefore, I explained to him the whole thing. And he said, make them so that the operator can be sitting there and looking down the paper, because random dots don't make a line. But if enough random dots make a line, you've got a submarine signature, or at least a noise in the water that was man-made, not whales, not shrimp. It's not raining. So at any rate, they made a whole new complete set of drawings and started all over again for the Yorktown. and that time, that by the time they had things pretty well squared away, it took them 2 months to come up with a drawing package. And I said, okay, that drawing package is going to have to be reproduced and sent to every place that's going to be making this installation. Well, yeah, okay, they did that. So I came back 2 weeks or a short while later, and lo and behold, everything was going pretty good. The next ship that was going to be done was the Wasp, number 18. Number 18 was in Boston. So when I found out that they were the ones going to get the next set of equipment, I went up to Boston and I walked onto the Wasp, and I walked in and I said, where's the ASW equipment going to be installed? And went in and showed me, and guess what? Yorktown all over again, flat tabletops. So I did the same thing with him. He said, the first thing he said was, we don't need the Yorktown drawings, we made our own. And I said, show me. And that's when I had to go through the explanation all over again. And I said, maybe what you ought to do is open up the Yorktown and see if it looks like yours. And He came back a couple hours later. He said, their drawings are entirely wrong. They don't show a flat tabletop. I said, okay. And I showed him the experiment between the shock mounts. And I said, now who's wrong? He said, I guess we are. So anyway, we got that squared away, got them squared away. So the next ship going to be equipped was going to be the Hornet, number 12. And I went to the Hornet and I walked in there and it was the same way. I said, where did you get the information? He said, we got the Yorktown package. I said, show me the Yorktown package. And he pulled the drawings out and somebody in Long Beach sent out to all of the shipyards the old Yorktown drawings. So everybody was putting in flat tabletops instead of ones to accommodate the shock mounts.
My God, and we still won the Cold War, Chuck.
Huh? Yeah.
After messing all that up, we still won the Cold War.
At that point, the Navy Department, in conjunction with the big bosses from the Pentagon, said, send a message to every one of the shipyards to throw away completely everything that was in the Yorktown package. And somebody said, well, what if they got the wrong one? Throw it away, we'll send them another whole set. But we want everybody to be playing the same trumpet in this band. And so that's how that got pretty well resolved. So so the Hornet, I walked on there, I canceled them until they ripped everything up and got it, and they restarted again. And they restarted again. That was in December of '67. And by the time they got the package and everything, they actually started in January of '68 with their ASCAC. Well, things went pretty well for a while. Things got installed. I would go inspect them. I'm going to have to get a cough drop, sorry. And they would entertain me and tell me everything seemed to be working. And lo and behold, they were. So at any rate, and the next one after that was the Kearsarge, number 33. It went smoothly. Everything was right. Everything got done. So they started that in June of '68, and that thing was operational all the way up until November of '69, when I could get to it and accept it again for the Navy. So the funny thing is, I was buying equipment for the Navy from Teledynamics. I would go to Teledynamics and inspect their building the equipment. When a component was finished, I would go over and watch the ambient tests on it, met all the specs. Then I would witness the hot, cold, and vibration tests. And if it passed all of them, I would sign off on it for the Navy. I accepted it for the Navy at Teledynamics, who had a civilian government employee, and he was their government man. And he had a room where when something passed all the tests and everything, he put it in here and padlock it. And Teledynamics couldn't get in there. That was the government room. Only the government employee could open up and get stuff in and out of there. So at any rate, then when it was ready to go, Teledynamics they just got in the habit of saying, we're ready to ship equipment to maybe Bremerton, Washington, to put on one of the aircraft carriers whose home port is up there. And they said, we want to be comfortable and not get stuff back. So we would like to go on the hook and pay our own employees to retest all of these pieces that are going to go. Would you come over and witness the tests? And I would do that, and I'd say yes, and I'd sign off on it, and then that would go with it to wherever it was going to go. And so I was the Navy, and in several different aspects of it, because I would supervise. Well, I didn't supervise. I witnessed the installations of the room where the ASCAC equipment was going to be installed. I witnessed the installation of them, and in the rack of equipment, you saw the size of that. It was several hundred pounds and very unruly. Certainly not something that a couple of sailors could tip over on end and go through the knee knockers to get it down the passageway. What they had to do was decide where they're going to put it, and then open up the flight deck. Take the wooden boards off the flight deck, cut down through the 8 inches of special steel, and make a hole big enough, because the SKR-6 had 4 bolts on the corners that a crane could pick it up and lower it down, and they would have bolts welded on the floor. And by some magical way, every one of those SKR-6s went right down over those bolts. The guys put the nuts on with lock washers, bolted it down, and it was part of the ship. And the only other thing was that when that humongous 3-inch antenna lead came coming down the mast, had to go into the back of the SKR-6. That coax cable was so stiff with the 1-inch diameter copper tube in the middle and styrofoam all around it, and then weatherproofed and weight supporting, was heavy as all get out. So they would never be able to plug that into the SKR-6. So they would terminate it at some column and then use a short coax cable, maneuverable, to get it into the back of the unit, just like they had to do at the top of the mast to get it into the preamplifier. And so anyway, many times I was called by a carrier and say, we're ready to leave. Would you come down and check out the ASCAC? And I'd say, okay, let me check. What's your schedule? And they would always call me a week or two ahead of time, and in case something had to be changed, replaced, or whatever. So I go to my boss and I said, I have to go so-and-so, San Diego, ship's leaving. They want me to come and check it out. The guy says, go ahead. He was like an administrative boss, but it had nothing at all to do with the work I was doing. I was the Lone Ranger. I was the program manager. So consequently, I could go and check it out. And I'd always stay overnight, because I wanted to run through the checks for the operators, which I always did during the day. And the maintenance guys, after supper, we'd have another session. And I had a few dummy modules at that point. I had a receiver with something wrong with it. I had a discriminator of the 32 with something wrong with it. And of course, they wouldn't realize what I was doing, and I would just pull the discriminator out and put this one in, or I would take the 4 bolts off of the screws off of the receiver and take it out. unplug it, put another receiver in, plug it in and put it in there with something wrong with it. So that was all good training. And I did a lot of traveling. I really did a lot of traveling. So well, at any rate, the next one after that, the Kearsarge, was the Bennington. Number 20. That was an old ship. And I went on it and I looked at where they were going to put it. And I looked at everything else on it. And when I went home, I went down to the Pentagon and I said, I don't think that Bennington is adequate. The ship, I don't think is adequate. Everything on it is old. It hasn't been kept up, it doesn't seem. And the people I talked to in the Pentagon said, called up over to the Navy Department and said, when's the last time people were on the Bennington? And they talked a little bit and said, what's their idea? And they'd say, well, it needs this, it needs this, it needs this. And they would come, and the bottom line, they said, Chuck, you're right. We're not going to put it on the Bennington. We're going to cancel it. So they did that. Next was the Intrepid, number 11. That was a good ship. It went in nicely. It was stationed also at the Quonset Point. I authorized it getting ready for September of '69, and it was July of '70 before I could get back on it to check out things after it had been on its first short cruise after being in the yard. After that was Ticonderoga. Ticonderoga was not really up to snuff, but it also wasn't a Bennington. So I told them that as far as I was concerned, they could give it a try if that's what they wanted to do. But they also canceled that one, and it did not get a NASCAC. The Saratoga was the next one. And it got I approved the installation on the Saratoga in January of '71, and by March of '71, the whole ASCAC was installed. I went back, ran my tests, and approved it. And they went off on their own, and that's all there was. Everything was installed, everything worked fine. I had them pull some of the discriminators and the spare receiver and plug them in and make sure that all their spare ones were operational. I said, you're good to go. You don't need me anymore. So that was pretty good. Next came the Independence. Whoops, where did Kennedy? Oh yes, I'm sorry, I skipped one, a couple. The same with Kennedy. Now, by the time they got to Kennedy, the ASCAC was supposedly going to be on the Kennedy, but they had been making modifications, and they changed the name to Anti-Submarine Warfare Module, and the module was a little different, not a whole lot different, but they had made some improvements. So they put it on the Kennedy, and it worked everything pretty well. The next one was Kitty Hawk, number 63. And there's not a whole lot I can say about all of these individual ones. The next one was the Independence, number 62. The Kennedy, it was done again. And next was Enterprise, number 65. the first nuclear one that got it. Now, when we got to the Ranger, number 61, it was also in rather poor condition. And the America next, number 66, was also in rather poor condition. So I recommended they just skip them. There were enough other carriers coming on board that they could work with. And the Nimitz was the next one. And that's the one I took the pictures inside. Once again, the Constellation, number 64. They tried to beg me to approve it. And I said, I don't think your ship can handle it. I think they're going to mothball this before it would make it effective. So they just let it go at that. The next one was Eisenhower. And I like this picture because it's got somebody trying to catch up to him. Maybe the guy missed climbing on it when it was at the pier and he got somebody to fly him out. I don't know. But at any rate, it got approved very quickly and was operational, and off it went. And the very last one I worked on while I was still working at NADC was the Vinson, number 70. And that was in Norfolk being done. And right outside, and it was very close to the fence, if you want to call it that. And right outside of, right across the street from where you get off of the ship and you go through across the fence, and you're out into Norfolk. And there was a restaurant over there. It was a Chinese restaurant, and we'd go in there and get a sandwich or something for lunch, rather than eat whatever it was they were eating on the ship. But at any rate, we went in one day, and the Chinese guy's out there, and he's got bread, and he's breaking bread up and throwing bread on the sidewalk, and the seagulls were eating the bread. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm feeding my chickens." I said to the guys, "Don't buy chicken salad sandwiches in this place." At any rate, that's my Vincent story. So, at any rate, I retired. And like I said, when I retired, they told me that I could not work on any of the teledynamics ASW equipment. So I get a phone call one day, and it's from the Pentagon when I was working at Teledynamics. And I said, "Why are you calling me?" He said, "We called NADC and asked for you, and you said you retired." And they said you retired. And I said, "Who took his place?" And they said, "Nobody." So they found out where I was. They called me. They made arrangements, and I went over to Yokosuka, Japan, and I put in a half of an ASCAC. In other words, for 4 sonobuoys. I mean, for yeah. Let me shut this guy off. Otherwise, thank you. So at any rate, I took care of that and went back to work. And I think I told you they charged the company $800 an hour for me to be away from my home. And that was 24 hours a day plus expenses. Well, I didn't have that many expenses, and I never got any of the money, but the company figured that's what my value to them was when I wasn't there. Who knows? So at any rate, after I finished this one midway installation of like a half a system, I got another phone call to go down to Norfolk because the Carl C number 43 had a NASCAC installed. Oh yes, I do. But yes, back up to, would you please, Eleanor? This is the picture of the Midway where I was installing this, and it was in dry dock, and I looked at it and I said, you know, you're never ever going to get an operation. I don't know what the world's ringing. It's not my telephone. So I said, I'm going to walk down the big long ladder or wraparound ladder to get down to the bottom of this thing. So I got down there, and it's monstrous. I mean, the part under the water is phenomenal. So I grabbed a white hat from a guy, and I walked from the back of the ship all the way to the point in the front underneath the Midway aircraft carrier. And not a lot of people are going to be able to say they did that. And I got to the front and came up the big one. Now I was wet. I was soaking wet when I got back. But I knew that whatever was coming out of the ship was not sewage. It wasn't garbage or anything. It was just, maybe they've been mopping the floor. I mean, it may have been dirty water, but it wasn't any bacterial worry. And there were puddles. And so anyway, when I got down there, you can show the next one, Eleanor. The lights in the middle, two white light strips of lights, is actually the sun reflecting on water that is underneath of the ship. And on either side of those two white lights are big, humongous blocks of wood, and they are spaced wherever there is a heavy point, all the way the whole length of the ship, from the front to the back, or from the back to the front. And I walked up this side, the starboard side, all the way, and got there and came back up again. So that was worth that. And then finally, one more time for the Midway, after the, you can show the rest of the pictures, Eleanor. Yeah. After I retired from teledynamics, I made a mistake and mentioned to my wife that I had driven to all 49 states by myself. And she said, well, you can do it again and take me with you. So this is our map of where we drove in 7.5 years in a 42-foot trailer the size of an 18-wheeler. And I had started trips from where I lived in Chester, Pennsylvania. We spent some winters in South Texas. We spent summers in Colorado and some other places up here. But down here in Texas, the temperature was okay, but the humidity was terrible. So we switched over to Tucson, Arizona, and we did some more traveling from there to Albuquerque and Salt Lake City, where my daughter and son live. And these were kind of where we originated more traveling and so forth. So I don't know, every time I show this map to somebody, oh, we traveled across the country. We drove from here to Denver and back. And I said, that's nice, very nice. I hope you enjoyed it. But at any rate, that's a total of 7.5 years being on the road. And I think I'm time to stop.
My God, that's quite a story, Chuck. I can't believe that one person basically single-handedly oversaw the
I'm
installation.
having trouble hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think it's amazing that essentially one person, yourself, oversaw the installation of this equipment on all these aircraft carriers for the entire fleet, basically. That's just amazing.
Thank you.
I'd like to open it up for a few questions if we have, because I know we're running long this evening. But if anyone has any questions, I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and please feel free to go on to unmute yourself and ask away. Well, I have another question, Chuck. How long was this equipment operational? I'm assuming it's not used today, but I'm just
No.
curious when it was phased out.
No, it isn't used today. And I have a story about that. One of my jobs was to monitor a contract what NADC had with a company in Corona, New York. They were trying to build what we call a waterfall display. Instead of the signals coming in to the AQA5 equipment and making dots on the paper, it would be a screen, and as those dots were being put on paper, they would be put electronically, of course, on the screen, and they would form the lines just identical to the lines formed on paper. Okay? If you've seen the movie, The Hunt for Red October, everybody has seen it. I must have seen it 25 or 30 times. It's my favorite movie, as a matter of fact. My second favorite movie was The Sting with Robert Redford and Paul Newman. And that was my number one because of the music in it. But at any rate, The Hunt for Red October. Well, Jonesy, the black sonar operator, had waterfall displays up there. And when I saw that, I said, the company could never get it to do exactly what we contracted them for. So therefore, they were using so much of their own money, they just couldn't keep it up. So anyway, I'm sure whoever had the contract with them took whatever they had, gave it to somebody else, maybe some big monsters company. This was a company maybe of 30 or 50 engineers, and that's about all it was. At any rate, when I saw that, I said, there's my contract. They got it working.
They got it working for Hollywood.
Yeah, right. It was, yeah. So anyway, that was good to see that. And so I do know that after I was finished with the Vincent, the last one I actually worked on it from NADC, they very well could have gone back and installed systems on the Bennington or the Constellation or the Hornet or the Ticonderoga. Certainly not the America and the Ranger. They were really in poor condition. So at any rate, with all of the carriers and so forth that we have had, I can give you a little bit of sense, and that is, like I said, we lost 5 carriers during the Second World War. And the first one, whoops. Yeah, the first aircraft carrier was the Langley. And that was named after the place where the Orville and his brother flew the first airplane. The Saratoga, the first Saratoga, not the one we have now, it survived the war, but in 1946, they wanted to test atomic bombs underwater.
Mm.
So at the Bikini atolls in the Pacific, they set off 2 atomic bombs underwater. The first one had the Saratoga set off to the side. And when it went off, it shook it and did whatever else it was going to do, but it didn't sink it. So when they set the second one off, they put the Saratoga aircraft carrier right at the limit of where the effect of the war from the water from the first one, the big explosion of water coming up. They set it right on the limit of that. And if you can find a photograph, and it was called Operation Crossroads. And if you can find a picture of that one going off, here's this monstrous big column of water, and there's an aircraft carrier standing on its end like that. That's the Saratoga.
Oh my gosh.
And when it came down, it didn't slow down. It just kept right on going. Okay. I'm looking for one more piece of paper here.
All right. Well, I don't know if anyone else has any questions. Otherwise, I think we'll probably have to call it a night, Chuck. But this was great. Really, thank you for going through all of this evening.
Okay.
It's
Here's the
really
paper I was
interesting.
looking for. Most of the carriers that I've talked about today have been sold for scrap.
Mm.
And it costs the Navy a lot of money to be able to sell them for scrap, because you've got all of this oily surfaces where they stored the fuel, where they had all kinds of things had to be scrubbed off. Paint had to be taken off down to bare metal with sandblasting and stuff. That's all expensive on something the size of an aircraft carrier. And they sold one of them for $1. They were just so glad to get rid of it that they sold it for $1 to a salvage company. Most of them, they were sold in the various places.
Wow.
However, can you see me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, because I can't see me. Anyway, 5 of our aircraft carriers are still living, old ones. The first one that I come to is the Yorktown, number 10. It was the 3rd carrier. I put an ASCAC on her, an MCJR on it. It is now a museum in Charleston, South Carolina. Tied up to the pier, people visited by the millions. The next one was Intrepid, number 11. That's in New York City, in the Hudson River. And it's a museum. You can go up and walk in it. And they got airplanes on the flight deck and hangar deck, and you can go up and you could probably spend a month searching all over it. The next one was the Hornet, number 12. That's a museum in Alameda, California. The same story. The next one was the 2nd Lexington, and I did not visit that one. That was not one that they were considering for an MCJR or an ASCAC, but it is a museum in Corpus Christi, Texas. And here again, you can go visit it. And the final one is the Midway, my old buddy, the Midway, who was in Yokosuka, Japan. And it's a museum in San Diego.
Wow.
So there are 5 of them still living. People are going to visit them, enjoying them and everything. And that's good to know too. There's one of them that's being held, and that is the Kennedy. And whoever is trying to collect enough money to pay the Navy to use it as a museum. They just don't have they don't have the funding behind them. And so at any rate, most of the other ones have been scrapped.
Mm.
Now, there were 8 carriers that were never considered, and they were what they used to call the Jeep carriers. They were small. They only held maybe 20 or 30 airplanes, but they were little and they could go fast to get where they need to go. And the carriers that weren't in service when I retired, so I never visited them, was after the 70s was the Vinson. The Teddy Roosevelt is 71. Abraham Lincoln is 72. George Washington is 73. Stennis, who was the Secretary of the Navy. Harry Truman was number 75. Ronald Reagan is 76. George Bush, 1, was 77. And now Ford is not only a new aircraft carrier, it's a new class of aircraft carriers. It looks entirely different than the ones that we're used to seeing, where the island is almost in the middle on the right-hand side. On the Ford, it's away towards the aft back end.
Oh, interesting.
Gives them much more space in front to do things with.
Right.
So number 79, it will be named Kennedy again. Number 80 will be another Enterprise. And number 81, believe it or not, an aircraft carrier is going to be named Doris Miller.
Huh.
So do you know who Doris Miller was?
I don't.
Doris Miller is not a female. Doris Miller is the name of a black guy who, during the attack on Pearl Harbor, he was a cook. And he went up on the flight deck and grabbed a machine gun that the guy had been shot using it. And he actually shot down the Jap Zero that was, going in front of him. And he was, because he was black, they kind of said, well, hey, that was pretty neat for him to do that because he was only a cook, but he was a Navy man. He went through basic training and just like the others. So at any rate, he was given, and he has since died. So he was given posthumously very high, I think the Navy's highest medal that they can give. And
Wow.
there's one more going to be number 82, and they have not named that yet.
Okay. Wow.
I'm going to send an email to the Pentagon and suggest me.
Oh, there you go. Well, listen, on that note, I'm going to go ahead and conclude this evening. This was great. I really appreciate you talking about this topic. I know it's been a long time coming, so really thank you again. And I want to thank those who stuck with us this evening. I know we ran quite long, but this was great. And look for some news about hopefully the dedication of our display room at NADC, probably around Veterans Day. So stay tuned for that, for any of you that are local to the Warminster area. So thanks again, Chuck, and we'll be in touch.
Okay.
All right,
Thanks,
thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.